Okay, I think we'll get started. We have a fair number of people that have already joined, so I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. As you are aware, this evening's topic is managing your finances with Vikas Twari as our presenter. There's just a few housekeeping items I'd like to address before we begin. Please note that all attendees are placed in listen-only mode. Audio and video are disabled. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box and we will do our best to address all your questions. And for future advocacy webinars for ideas, topics, please email info@lupuscanada.org. I will now pass this over to Ariana Ranjabar, who is our moderator for this evening's webinar. Ariana?
Thanks, Leanne. I would like to introduce you all to our guest tonight, Vikas Twari. Vikas is a board member with Lupus Canada and is an experienced wealth management professional who currently manages an independent wealth advisory practice with clients based throughout North America. Thanks for being a panelist with us tonight, Vikas.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks so much for the introduction, Leanne and Ariana. Okay, I guess I'll jump into the presentation and I will pull up, here we go, the slide deck. Okay, can you guys see everything okay, I think?
Yes, everything's good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right, guys. Hello and welcome to today's Lupus Canada Advocacy Webinar. It's the second one in our series, and this one is titled Managing Your Finances While Living with Lupus. Today, we'll be jumping into some basic budgeting topics as well as financial planning topics. We'll talk a little bit about insurance benefits as well, and then a specific lens around all these things with while dealing with lupus, of course. So what you'll get out of today. As I mentioned, before, we want to talk about the specific differences in financial management for patients with lupus. Then we'll jump into that overview I talked about on how to manage your finances. And then we will give you some practical tools for aligning your finances with your values and goals in the long term. Okay, so those are the three things you're going to get out of today. I'm just going to pop into the agenda here that's going to kind of break down how we're going to cover all the topics. So on today's agenda, first off, we want to talk about what the additional costs you can expect from an autoimmune disease. Also, following that, we're going to get into getting organized around your finances. So this is like the first thing to do when it comes to managing your money. That leads us into our mindful budgeting conversation. We want to make sure, the budgeting aspect of things is huge. And then that mindfulness piece is something I want to touch on towards the end of that section. That leads us into budgeting for emergency funds and, of course, managing debt. And finally, managing insurance benefits from your employer with a specific focus on short and long-term disability benefits. We'll touch a little bit on government assistance programs that are available as well, followed by additional sources of income, and finally, reaching out for support. Now, just before we get into the additional costs to expect from an autoimmune disease, anytime we're talking about financials and things like that, we do have to make a disclaimer. So I'm going to read this out to you straight from the screen. Bear with me, try not to fall asleep, and we'll get this webinar up and running. So this presentation is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained in this presentation constitutes solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Lupus Canada or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any products or services. All content in this presentation is information of a general nature and does not address the circumstances of any particular individual or entity. This presentation does not constitute professional and/or financial advice, nor does any information presented constitute a comprehensive or complete statement of the matters discussed or the law relating thereto. Lupus Canada is not a fiduciary or virtue of any person's use by virtue of any person's use of or access to the information provided in this presentation. You alone assume the sole responsibility of evaluating the merits and risks associated with the use of any information or other content in this presentation before making any decisions based on such information or other content. Okay, that gets that out of the way. I'm so happy we got that done. And now I get to talk be a little bit selfish here. I'm going to give you an introduction about myself. So again, as mentioned, my name is Vikas Twari. I'm currently sat on the board of directors with Lupus Canada, currently the treasurer of Lupus Canada. Biggest thing for me is I am passionate about helping other people through my knowledge of wealth management. It's what I do. It's what I've been doing since I graduated school. And my favorite quote is by Ray Dalio. Remember that there are typically many paths to achieving your goals. You only need to find one that works. And that's an important thing for everyone to remember. Okay, now let's get into the meat and the potatoes of the presentation. First off, let's talk about the additional costs to expect from an autoimmune disease. So first off, for those of you living with lupus, a lot of these things are going to be, you already know about, right? And for anyone out there with perhaps a new diagnosis, this might be things you want to be able to plan for. So of course, medications are a big one. As you know, some prescription medications can become expensive. And with lupus, you may need to take different ones, including anti-inflammatories, immunosuppressants, and so forth. Fortunately, there are a lot of generics out there to help cover the costs of these prescriptions. And you've got insurance programs through your employers that can also help with the costs. Other than that, there's also over-the-counter things that you might need to take, like allergy pills or pain relievers and things like that. And of course, there are supplements for your diet if you need to supplement things. So, those types of things can add up, and if you're buying them on a consistent basis. Of course, we want to also talk about equipment, clothing, and adaptations. Some people during severe flares of lupus might find themselves needing the assistance of some equipment, such as wheelchairs. I know that some people who have lupus have a lot of sensitivity to sunlight, so you may need to get some UV protective clothing. There's other adaptations that you might need as well, such as an ergonomic chair or footrest for your workplace or your home office these days as well. Transportation is another one. Typically patients with lupus are going to be moving from different appointments for different healthcare practitioners, as well as just general things like going to the grocery store and whatnot. There may be an increased cost here. If you don't own a car, you might be taxiing or Ubering these days to get to manage all of your day-to-day needs. So again, those additional costs, though small, will add up over time, or can add up over time. Travel is another one. So something to remember when we think of traveling. Now, obviously these days we're not traveling much, but when things reopen and pre-pandemic, I should say, people with lupus typically spend a premium on accessibility. And what that means is it'll be more expensive to secure, say, a hotel in an area that is closer to major facilities or attractions, because you don't want to go through additional travel, or additional fatigue might set in, things like that. So you might be looking at getting a hotel or accommodations closer to bigger areas, and for that we typically pay a premium. The other thing is when we think of traveling, the cost of travel, medical insurance might be a little bit higher. And finally, also with traveling, or sorry, no, that was it. It was just the increased costs related to travel medical insurance. The big one though, and this can really add up, is the missed days from work. According to a 2015 study, people living with lupus missed work due to symptoms like fatigue and pain. This was especially true for lupus patients who held both very physical and cognitively demanding professions. So, it's not just affecting people who are physically, working with their hands or whatnot. If you're required to use your, cognitive abilities with work, or entirely use your brain to do work, knowledge work is what we call it these days, lupus can have effect on that as well, because we see, the brain fog that comes up with flares can prevent you from working. So a day missed here or there doesn't really make a big difference, but several days missed does add up. And there's also other healthcare costs. So specialty foods is listed there. If you're working with a dietitian, you might be buying certain groceries or certain things to supplement your diet or take care of your diet in different ways. The other thing is to remember up to 25% of people living with lupus may be hospitalized each year. Now, in Canada, we're very fortunate to have our governments pay for a lot of the healthcare needs of us. But depending on your situation, you may opt for a semi-private or private room during a hospital stay, and that usually has an added cost to it. Sometimes you'll be paying entirely out of your pocket. Sometimes you might have some benefits through your employer that you can rely on, but even then, they usually cover a portion of this and not the whole thing. So just to quickly recap here, we've got medications, equipment, clothing adaptations, transportation, travel, missed days of work, and other healthcare costs. When you add up all these things together, it can get substantially more expensive for someone living with an autoimmune disease relative to someone who wouldn't be. Okay, now let's talk about, I want to move into how do you plan for these types of things, right? We know that you might have to spend more money to manage your day-to-day, but the important thing here is getting organized around your finances. For many people out there, financial management and taking a hard look at your own books can be a daunting task. The important thing to do, to remember when I tell people to get organized around their finances, the first thing is to always have the right state, the right mindset. And we call step one intent. So you want to know that this is something you will accomplish. Absolutely. You're going to get through this. You're just going to get all your things together, and it's something you can get done. Many people are doing it. It will yield positive results. So getting organized around your finances is not going to put you in a worse position. It's just going to make you more knowledgeable about your own situation. And remember, you're not alone. And that has two different meanings. Other people are in the same boat as you. And in addition to that, there's a lot of people around you, your caregivers, your family, any financial professionals you're dealing with, they're all here to help. And you can lean on these people to kind of help you pull together, any documents and so forth you need to put together. So step two is exactly that. Gathering your documents. Sorry. Okay, we came back. Right, so gathering your documents. This is a very important step. This is like if you're an unorganized person around your finances, you'll find this step alone will make you feel so much better. So I'm talking getting your bank account statements, your credit cards, your mortgage statements, your insurance statements for life insurance, critical illness insurance, all that stuff, your notice of assessments that you get every year from your taxes, your wills, your power of attorneys, get it all together, gather it all. And I put it in quotation marks because it can be digital or physical, right? If you like keeping physical records of everything, I suggest getting one of those accordion-like binders with several dividers and having a divider for each one of these major things, or major categories, major components. If you're doing things digitally, maybe an encrypted folder or a spreadsheet that tracks all this information is something that could work for you. So gathering all your documents, this will definitely yield positive results. Just this act alone, you might notice you have some extra money in a savings account that you forgot about, or hey, there's something that you forgot to pay for at some point in time, or there's an expense that you might remember to pay for in the future. So getting organized, gathering everything in itself is very, very helpful. Finally, step three, the financial management toolkit. So this really is setting up a checklist of all the major things. So if you think that gathering all those documents is kind of a lot, we've put together a checklist for you that goes over budgeting, financial planning, and insurance benefits. So what I would suggest is keeping this checklist with you, going through that checklist, going through it, making sure you have all the documents you need, and updating it periodically. So if you're using a physical binder, for example, you would keep that checklist at the front of the binder. You'd make sure all of your financial planning documents are in that binder. And on a periodic basis, you can update it on, say, a quarterly or annual basis. So you can get rid of the old stuff, put the new stuff in, and that way you always have an updated financial picture, a financial snapshot, right, all together in one folder. And as I mentioned, it's going to be available online. So we've made it easy for you. We've put together what we've called a financial management toolkit, and that will be available on our website, lupuscanada.org. Okay, so once you've gotten organized around your finances, the big thing is that mindful budgeting. What is mindful budgeting? Well, budgeting is budgeting. The mindful piece we'll jump into. Okay, so I've got a question for you all. As of 2019, what percentage of Canadians reported having a budget? Is it A, 17%, B, 68%, C, 49%, or D, 34%? So I think Ariana's going to help me tally some votes here. You can do this in the chat box, I think. Is that right?
Yep, in the chat box.
Perfect. So put your
We
answers
have
in
an
the
A so far from
Okay.
Charlene.
17%. All right.
We
Any
have
other
a
guesses?
D, 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 A, D.
Okay.
So far, that's it.
So we got some A's, 17%. You guys don't have a lot of faith in the budgeting capabilities of Canadians. 34%, not so bad, close, but the correct answer is actually C, 49%. About half of Canadians report having a budget, which is actually up from the 5 years previously at 46% in 2014. So that's kind of interesting. And also the most common method of budgeting is using a digital tool such as a spreadsheet or app, and we can get into that. But that was actually kind of surprising to see. And it's actually makes a lot of sense. There's been a lot of financial literacy going on, programs through the government and different entities, different regulatory institutions. So it's good to see, a little bit higher than some people expect, actually higher than everyone expected, really, if all the answers were A and D. So it's good. About half of Canadians. Now, mindful budgeting. This is very good. Budgeting itself, let's just talk about the benefits. You probably already know, but Canadians who do budget are less likely to fall behind on their commitments, less likely to spend more than their monthly income, and are less likely to borrow to meet their commitments. So we know that there are definitely benefits to budgeting, right? But the important thing to remember here, and this is where the mindfulness piece comes in, you work hard for your money. So why not make your money work hard for you? As I mentioned before, in that Stats Canada survey, people are typically finding financials to be quite stressful for them. The single most well, in addition to starting to get your finances organized, one of the biggest things you can do for yourself is getting it out of your mind and putting it on paper. That's something I do in all parts of my life. I'm a big believer in writing. Anything that's stressful, get it out on paper so it's not jumping around in my brain and causing me random thoughts during the middle of the day. No, I know I have it written down and I know I'm going to get to it. So get it on paper, write it down on a screen, or put it down on a screen and get it out of your mind. The big thing to do when you're budgeting is to also understand your goals around your money, right? Are you going to have a major purchase coming up? Are you thinking of buying a home? Are you planning for retirement? What type of lifestyle do you want, right? And you should reconcile this with what things you value the most. So obviously shelter, right? You got to pay your rent, your mortgage, for your family, for yourself. Is your family important to you? Education for yourself, for your children. Legacy, right? Generational wealth transfer. Do you want to leave behind money for future generations? Philanthropy might be a very important thing to you as well. So really understanding, why you are earning money in the first place, what you want to do with it, is really going to help you with your budgeting in the long term. Gradually, as you start using these budgeting tools and start budgeting, with this mindfulness approach of knowing what your long-term goals are, you can gradually align your day-to-day spending with your goals and values. It's easy to get carried away with spending when there's no real destination in mind. But when you have a bit of a plan in place, the budgeting takes care of itself. I mean, there's some work involved for sure, but the spending habits will really start checking themselves. As you budget, you'll be able to plan ahead for cash flows, and by that I mean random expenses that come up, but you can plan for them, that typically might be a bit of an inconvenience, like paying for winter tires, or where am I going to get the money to go on vacation? You just kind of make these purchases ad hoc sometimes. And the big one here is when you start budgeting and understand the movement of your money, is you get an understanding and you get in tune with which expenses can be easily reduced, right? If in the case that for some reason your income is declining, you can easily you can easily reduce, I'm not going to go out as much anymore. We don't go out these days, but in regular circumstances. And of course, you can gear up your savings and investments when you know what your goals are, right? So now let's jump into some budgeting tools. Interestingly, Canadians who actively use digital tools to budgeting are among the most likely to keep on top of their bill payments and monthly cash flow. So here's just some examples. This is not a comprehensive list at all on things that help with budgeting and managing expenses. So automation is your friend. Old Faithful, Microsoft Excel, that's something you can use. Mint is a great program that connects with your bank accounts and pulls information. YNAB, or You Need a Budget, is a company out of the US. They've got their whole philosophy around budgeting as well. And QuickBooks for the self-employed is a great way of tracking expenses and income. And of course, most major banks and credit card companies typically have their mobile apps, and they've got these spending trackers, and they'll tell you, oh, I've spent more on groceries this month than last month. And all of these tools are kind of helping us make better and better decisions. So gather these tools, gather your documents, gather your tools, plan your budget, and then use these tools to enable your budget to make those decisions on a day-to-day basis while keeping in mind that long-term focus. Now, budgeting is great, but something we should always budget for is emergencies, having an emergency fund. Best way I like to think about emergency fund is rolling with the punches. So the definition of a boxer, to move one's body away from an opponent's blows to lessen the impact. That means on a day-to-day basis is being able to adapt oneself to adverse circumstances. So the rainy day fund, or the emergency fund, is not for seasonal things, like I said, like winter tires or property taxes, back to school and whatnot. Those types of things you're going to want to budget for in your budget, right? Those are things you can expect. An emergency fund ideally is going to be budgeted to have 3 to 6 months of your monthly expenses. So for example, if on a month-to-month basis you're spending $3,000 and you want a 3-month emergency fund, you want to keep $9,000 in cash. So if all of your income disappears for 3 months, you can keep going. And if not, you can double that for 6 months. Now, for patients living with lupus, remember, everyone is different. You know yourself better than anyone else. So the needs for your emergency funds may be a little bit more than the average, 3-month emergency fund. The other thing to remember, emergency funds can coordinate with your benefits. So if you have a short or long-term disability plan that covers a certain portion of your income while you're away from work, your emergency funds can serve as a top-up on a month-to-month basis. But think of this, emergency funds as a way of taking care of expenses like your car breaking down, urgent visits to the vet, for your pets, to going to the vet, and of course, as we just mentioned, any health-related issues or job loss. Now, having 3 to 6 months of income of your income saved as cash just for emergencies without touching might not be something you have right now, right? But by no means does that mean you can't build an emergency fund. If you don't have the capacity for emergency funds, you can definitely build one. Make it a priority on that budget. Open a savings account. It's very easy, low fees, and set up an automatic transfer. And the biggest thing I can say is be realistic and start small. Some examples here: if you put in $10 a week, after a year, you'll have $520 in your emergency fund. All the way up to $100 a week, of course, you'll have $5,200 at the end of the year. So if you don't have an emergency fund, don't panic, budget for it. Just put it in there, make it a priority, and you'll start saving towards having an emergency fund, and you'll be able to roll with the punches a little bit better. Now, jumping into the next topic, managing debt. Now, this is very important for Canadians. I'm sure you've heard that Canadians are quite indebted. And that brings us to our next question to the audience. So in December of 2020, so very recently, Statistics Canada reported debt to income ratios. For every dollar Canadians earn, how much are we spending? A, $1.20 for every dollar we're earning, $1.81, $1.71, or $1.44. What do we think?
You're getting D, D, D,
Okay.
D.
All right. Everyone's thinking it's $1.44. That's good. I mean, I mean, ideally it's one of the lower numbers. Actually, it's C, so it's a little bit higher than what some of you expect. So Canadians are spending 171% or going into debt at a rate of 171% relative to their income, which is interestingly because the year before in 2019, it was actually higher. So this is going to bring me to my next question. Debt to income ratios were down during the pandemic. Why do you think that is? So A, banks allowed borrowers to defer mortgage payments. B, people were generally spending less during the pandemic. C, RSPs and TFSAs grew over the year during to positive stock market returns. Or D, Elon Musk tweeted about Bitcoin. What do we think the answers are? Why did debt to income ratios decrease during the pandemic?
Getting a couple B's, an A. Someone said A, but also D. A B, D, A.
Okay. A few more?
Definitely D. Someone said.
Definitely D. Well, he's got a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Well, maybe for some people. Anyhow, I don't think enough Canadians invest in Bitcoin for that to be a thing. In any case, the correct answer is B, actually. So people were generally spending less during the pandemic. People aren't going out, and so they're able to put more money towards their debt. Now, although A looks correct, right? Banks allowed borrowers to defer mortgage payments, doesn't really have an impact on income or debt. It actually increases your debt because the banks are still going to collect from you, and you're actually paying interest on those deferrals. RSPs and TFSAs grew over the year due to positive stock market returns. Stock market was up, but RSPs and TFSAs don't contribute to income. That's more of a net worth thing. And finally, Elon Musk tweeting about Bitcoin probably had a bit of an impact, but generally not the reason why debt to income ratios in Canada were down during the pandemic. So B, people were generally spending less and had some more extra money to be putting towards their liabilities, which is great. Okay, so on to managing debt. We got to understand how credit can be used constructively and destructively. There's a bit of a difference here, right? High interest debt versus low interest debt, right? This is another thing to keep in mind. Now, destructive debt, think of this as that, falling behind and, using higher interest rate products to manage your day-to-days or to keep up with your finances, to keep up with your obligations. Think of, credit cards are a great tool to build credit history and accumulate, rewards points and things like that, or cash back. But if you're not paying your balances on a regular basis, typically credit cards have an interest rate of about 20%, 19.99, so forth. So if you're carrying a balance on your credit cards, then that's more of a destructive use of credit because you're getting into the cycle of not paying off your liabilities and racking up high interest debt. Another example that would be payday loans. Those can get into an annualized interest rate in the triple digits, which is crazy. It's a very vicious cycle. But there is constructive use of debt, right? So this can be your mortgage or home equity lines of credit. So these are massive loans that you typically take on to purchase property, and property is like the biggest investment or biggest purchase most people are going to make in their life. And it typically over the long term goes up in value. So, you can think of it as a bit of an investment, and, borrowing at a low interest rate to invest into something that's going to grow over time is a more constructive use of debt, of credit. Another use of credit is for consolidating debt, right? So if you've got a couple of high interest rate credit cards or some loans and things like that, you can always consolidate your debt into one product, which can be like a regular loan or a line of credit. Ideally, it's on like a home equity line of credit, so the interest rates are very low, and you're able to not pay the high interest and maybe just have one payment towards your liabilities instead. So Constructive, we can use it for investment purposes to grow in the long run. Another reason to use your debt is to consolidate, or to constructively use credit is to consolidate high interest debt. Destructive use of debt, of course, is those high interest rate loans, credit cards, and so forth that put us in a position worse off than we were before. Now, managing debt, paying it down, that's a big one, right? How do we pay down our debt? It's a very easy step-by-step process, but it might require, it's going to be a little bit painful if there's a lot out there. So step one is to identify your debts. Pull it all together. Like I said, get organized, pull all those documents together so you know exactly what you owe and where. Make it a priority, right? Review your budget, put it into the budget, and know that you have to make payments towards your debt, and get an idea of how long it would take to pay down your debt. But how would you know without having a strategy first? So step 3, decide on a strategy. Now, some people, typically it makes sense to pay down high interest rate debt first, right? That's where you're paying the biggest, that's where the biggest cost of borrowing is, right? So you want to get rid of high interest rate debt first. Some people, however, like to pay down the smallest balances first. And it really comes to person. Logically, high interest rate debt should take priority. But for some people, if they have like a $10,000 credit card and a $5,000 credit card that they have to pay off, maybe paying down the $5,000 credit card is going to be more gratifying because that's one less thing that they have to think about, right? That's one less liability on their list. So find a balance that works for you. And of course, step 4 is consolidating. So lower your overall interest rate by consolidating some debts if that's an option. And step 5, avoid taking on more debt, right? When you're putting together a plan to pay things off, you want to make sure that you're paying things off, and ideally, once you've paid off, say, a credit card, you can close it entirely. And that just prevents you from taking on more debt, especially some of that more destructive debt that we talked about just a second ago. There's a lot of resources out there as well. So you know where to get help. There are nonprofit credit counselors, financial advisors, or licensed insolvency trustees. There's also a lot of community organizations. So keep tabs on what's going on in your community, what programs your municipality might have to help you managing and paying down your debt. So that's a big one. So yeah, debt, managing debt's important. There are good uses of credit. There are destructive uses of credit. And if you do have some credit that you want to get a hold of, get managed, just follow these steps here. Identify, budget for it, make it a priority, figure out a strategy, consolidate if you can, don't take on more debt, and pay that stuff down. Get help where you need it. Okay, that leads me into the next piece here. Insurance benefits from your employer. So, insurance benefits are incredible. You can get coverage for healthcare, wellness, medical prescriptions, and so forth. So I'm gonna go here. I'm not sure why, but the formatting is a little weird. Anyhow, some employers offer benefits programs for their employees. These can help cover the cost of various health and medical related expenses, such as dental, vision, and prescription costs. Some also offer the wellness account that I just mentioned, and that can be used for expenses such as treatments such as massages, physiotherapy, chiropractors, and that kind of thing. Now, depending on the robustness of the plan, of the benefits that your employer offers, you may also be eligible to enroll in their short-term and long-term disability coverages. So an important part of these programs is that you're actually able to customize these benefits. So for example, if on the basic medical prescription plan, the basic plan may offer to cover 60% of your prescriptions, you may be able to pay more into the program and get one that covers 80 to 100% of all prescriptions, right? So that's a very useful thing, especially for patients with lupus, right? Moving on to short and long-term disability, these programs are in place if you're unable to work due to medical concerns for a prolonged period of time. Once you claim short-term disability, the benefits you will receive are basically kind of like a percentage of your income, and they'll be paid out by the insurance provider. up to a maximum of 6 months. And that's when long-term disability comes in. After the 6-month mark, a long-term disability policy will come in and pay you typically less than what the short-term disability plan does. So things to consider when you're looking at insurance benefits: select the right plan for your household. Remember, a lot of these plans will allow you to add on spouses and dependents as beneficiaries or benefactors of the benefits. So the dental programs can be extended to your spouse and kids. The other things to consider are how much would you need to cover your expenses. This more goes into that long-term and short-term disability conversation. And of course, how soon will I receive benefits? So imagine you don't opt for short-term disability, but you opt for long-term disability instead. So you've got 6 months where you need to cover your own expenses, right? So things to think about. Remember, there's a lot here to consider, but you'll be getting that checklist from Lupus Canada. It'll be on the website, and it'll be easy to review everything on your budgets and financial planning and insurance benefits. So a bit of a deep dive now into short-term disability and long-term disability. So we're going to do a bit of an example here. Let's say an example of short-term disability. Claire is unable to work due to complications related to a flare-up from lupus, and it looks like she'll be out for a few weeks, maybe a few months. Now, her plan, luckily enough, has short-term disability that covers up to 80% of her income. So that's great. So during the duration that she's not working, she gets 80% of her income on a month-to-month basis, and that helps her cover her expenses. Now, let's shift into long-term disability. Let's say she's out of work for more than 6 months. So now Claire is needed to stop working for more than 6 months, and she returns after 13 months. So after the first 6 months of short-term disability, Claire transitions into long-term disability, and her plan only covers 40% of her expenses. So as I mentioned, it is going to be lower than the short-term disability payouts. So now she's getting less, but just keep in mind, it's still a great supplement that she's receiving. And again, keep in mind that you're no longer receiving these benefits, or you're no longer receiving income from your employer. You're receiving a benefit from an insurance company instead. Now, this is the interesting part. Coordinating your emergency funds with your disability claims. And I touched on this earlier. So when you're on short and long-term disabilities, as we know, you're not going to make 100% of your income typically. Some short-term disabilities do offer 100%. But your emergency funds can serve as a top-up, right? So you have 3 months of expenses saved up for times where you have no income. So when your income is reduced due to a disability and you're able to collect some benefits, you can top it up instead. It's actually likely in some cases that the short-term disability is able to cover your month-to-month expenses, so you don't even have to tap in to your emergency funds during that time. And we're going to jump into this example to kind of illustrate that. So coming back to our example of Claire, I'm going to do a laser pointer here. Okay. Again, so the useful life of your emergency funds can be extended greatly. So on the left side here, I've got source of income. So regular employment, short-term disability, and long-term disability. So regular income right now on a month-to-month basis is $5,000 for Claire. And her monthly expenses are $3,500. So if we multiply 3,500 by 3, so she has a 3-month emergency fund, that equals 10,500, right? So she has $5,000 in income, 3,500 in monthly expenses. So her surplus on a month-to-month basis is $1,500, and she uses that for retirement savings and going out and things like that. So the need to tap into emergency funds regularly under regular employment is not applicable. Now she goes on short term, where she's making 80% of her income. So she's not working, but she's still collecting that $4,000. Her monthly expenses are still the same because you still got to pay your mortgage and your property taxes and so forth. Her surplus is decreased, right? But it's still positive at $500. And now her emergency funds are still not needed because she's still operating at a surplus. Now the 6 months expire, right? Now she's moving into long-term disability. Now she's only getting 40% of her income, right? That's a big hit. $2,000 is what she's getting as income now, and her expenses stay the same, so she's at a shortfall of $1,500. Now this 10,500 needs to cover this shortfall down here, and that lasts for 7 months. So a 3-month emergency fund can last 7 months on long-term disability. So keep in mind, she was getting paid for 6 months here. She was off. She was still not, didn't need to tap into it. But when she went into long-term, she was. So that's 13 months of peace of mind that she had from having an emergency fund and, being on top of her benefits packages through her employer. Something to note though, this example doesn't take taxes into consideration, and it doesn't take government benefits into consideration, because there are some benefits that are available through the government for disability, and we're going to jump into that right now. Government assistance programs. So employment insurance, EI, CPP or QPP in Quebec, do both have disability components to them. So you are able to draw on them for disability. There's also a disability tax credit that is available, as well as registered disability savings plan, which is like an investment and savings plan where the government is giving grants into a savings account for the person who is living with a disability. Now, we're not getting into detail about these programs. I believe we're going to be tackling this in a subsequent webinar down the road. But it's just to give you an idea that there are some government programs available that do offer that assistance. Financial planning is what I'd like to move in now. Financial planning is really aligning your goals and values with your budgeting. So financial planning is an effective way to start saving towards future goals and prepare for unexpected expenses. When we think of budgeting, it seems like month to month type of thing, right? We think of budgeting for this month or that month. A financial plan, on the other hand, is like budgeting, but for decades or lifetimes, right? So it's much bigger picture, and it allows you to roll with the punches. And by big picture, we're talking about retirement savings, major purchases, major renovations, educations. So these big ticket items are usually what we do in financial planning. And again, as I mentioned, it's a very, very helpful way of aligning your day-to-day spending with your long-term goals. So you've got your month-to-month goals, that micro stuff that you want to focus on, that keeps you going from month to month, and you're killing it. You're on top of everything. But the long-term goals are what's keep you mindful about the spending in the present, and having that peace of mind that I'm going to retire at this age. I can do these renovations and so forth. So interestingly, Canadians who have a plan to save are more confident that they know how much they need to save for retirement. So that's important, and they know that their savings will provide the standard of living they hope for, compared to those who do not have a plan for retirement. So financial planning just gives you more peace of mind. In fact, Canadians' anxiety about retirement is heavily concentrated among those who do not yet have a plan to save for retirement. So it is incredibly helpful just to take a load off your mind. So the big theme here is to get things out on paper and get them out of your mind. Budgeting, financial planning, all these tools, all these things are going to help you do that. And finally, financial planning checklist. Again, you guys are going to get a copy of this in the financial management toolkit, but it just kind of puts in perspective the level or the degree of things you have to think about, right? There are 6 components here in financial planning. We're looking at investments, estate planning, retirement plans, insurance, debt management, and family assistance, with subcomponents underneath. But getting organized in all these areas of your finances, it's not going to happen overnight, but getting these checklists going and perhaps bringing them to a financial professional to discuss the areas that you've prioritized are definitely going to help you get some peace of mind. Now, reaching out for support. This is a big one. Again, there are a lot of people out there, you are not alone, who are willing to help. You've got family, caregivers, government agencies, advocacy groups like Lupus Canada. Here we are. We're doing this right now. Your healthcare team, if there's anything they can think of to help you manage expenses, pharmacists, your doctors, things like that. Your employer's human resources department is a huge one. So, become friends with them, figure out how you can maximize your benefits, understand your own condition. Of course, financial planners, the professionals in the industry who can help you build out these plans as well. And of course, the internet. So something interesting is, I know that some of these topics may resonate with some people, some topics may not. But you can do a deep dive on these things on your own on the internet just to get an idea or tools. The Government of Canada is where a lot of the materials here came from, the Government of Canada website. So they've got a lot of information about financial literacy. They're watching the debt to income ratios, and they want to make sure Canadians are doing the right things when it comes to their finances. So I just want to end here, right, with a quote. That same quote that I started with. Remember that there are typically many paths to achieving your goals. You only need to find one that works. And that really kind of encompasses what we're trying to do here. For those of you living with lupus, you've got enough on your plate. Let's put it all on paper or digital, put it on a screen, and get some peace of mind around your finances. And I hope this has been a helpful presentation. I think now we'll transition into a Q&A section.
Yeah, we'll just wait and see if anyone has any questions, and then we can address all of them.
Are we good for time? I feel like.
We have about 12 minutes. Yeah.
Perfect.
I guess while we're waiting for some questions, I just want to thank you, Vikas, for spending your time with all of us tonight. We have, like I said, about 12 minutes left. So I would just like to remind everyone that you can follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can keep up to date on any upcoming webinars we may have. And just to let you all know that this webinar will also be recorded and posted on our website. So if you ever need to reference it, you will be able to do so. And no questions as of right now.
Okay.
I think your presentation was so thorough. No one has any questions at this time. Yeah, it was a lot of great information to take in and to take away and think about. And we welcome anybody to send us any questions to info@lupuscanada.org, and we will do our best if we can answer them. If not, we'll try and point you in the right direction in which we can get those answers for you. Thank you so much.
Great. And happy to do this. I just want to reiterate that those checklists that we put together around budgeting, financial planning, and employer benefits, all are going to be available on the website. Those are, if you start doing that, if you go through those checklists and bring them to your financial professional, they'll be blown away. So it's going to be a great way to get organized.
Great, fantastic. I think if we don't have any questions at this time, I think we can probably conclude and thank everybody again for joining us. Thank you to Vikas for a wonderful, thorough presentation. And thank you to Ariana for being our moderator this evening.
No worries. I believe Andrea just quickly messaged saying that she had sent a question, but unfortunately, Andrea, we don't see your question. So maybe if you wanted to just retype it so that we can answer. Solin says, thank you for a great presentation, Vikas.
Oh, happy to do it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So Andrea asks, I'm curious about saving as much as I can with to upcoming taxes.
Don't quite understand the question. Curious about saving as much as I can with respect to upcoming taxes. So if I'm understanding correctly, saving more money while trying to budget for taxes. Right, regarding to upcoming taxes. So again, this all really comes down to the process of budgeting, right? Knowing which liabilities are coming up, and frankly, taxation is a big liability. So I take it you might be self-employed, and so you're looking to, you've got to. It's just one of those things that you're going to have to plan for every month. Maybe put some money aside that'll go eventually to the government, in addition to the regular types of like a regular type of liability.
And Charlene asked, I'm curious if lupus patients can be eligible for life insurance.
That really does depend. So yes, I want to say there are some policies out there that will have exclusions, right, about certain people, certain conditions and whatnot. But there are also policies out there that they don't ask for any medical history or anything like that. It's a bit specific. I can't really get into individual specifics here. But if there is an insurance agent in your network, you'd be more than happy to, reach out to them, and I'm sure they can give you a good response.
Yeah, and Charlene, we actually have some information about that. So if you wanted to reach out to us at the office or through info@lupuscanada.org, we have a company that we're aware of that does take care of life insurance for those with disabilities and even travel insurance. So we can give you that information.
Andrea did send another message, but it may have gotten confused with other messages. So I'm just gonna, she said, go to the government website, no, not self-employed, in terms of disability, tax credit, etc. I believe for the upcoming taxes. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or
no, I'm not sure what the question is.
Sorry, Andrea.
Yeah, maybe perhaps Andrea, if you want to send an email to info@lupus with maybe a longer form question, we can take a look at it.
Yeah, and then other than that, Charlene said thank you for answering her question, and I think that is it as of right now.
Okay.
Great. Well, oh, there's some more things coming in here.
Christine has said, fantastic job, very informative, and a great tool for patients and caregivers.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear.
Oh, Andrea said no need. I guess it was confused in the translation of the conversation. I'm so sorry if I don't pronounce your name properly. Luz, thank you so much for putting this together. It was super helpful and easy to grasp for us non-financial savvy people.
Oh, amazing. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Just to let everyone know, the webinar we'll be holding in April will be around mental health and living with lupus. And there'll be some other fantastic topics that are coming up in the next few months that I think everyone will find very helpful and informative. So we hope you'll join us with those webinars as well. Great.
Perfect.
I think we can sign off.
Okay. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.